I've been using this thoughts on format as a way to spontaneously and more casually talk about news that I find interesting and have a bit to say about, and this is definitely one of those times. Just a quick aside for those who aren't familiar with me. Although I've become primarily a PC player over the years, I own tons of consoles, and I particularly love PlayStation exclusive games. You can check out some of my older game reviews where I talk about that. So here's the news. Sony put out a slide deck for investors. It's not leaked or from some dubious source. It's a PDF hosted on a Sony URL. This is as legit as it gets, and one of the slides talks about their entry into the PC market and flags Uncharted 4 as the next PC release after Days Gone. I'm not surprised that Sony is putting out yet another game on PC, but I am surprised that it's Uncharted 4, and the slide itself gives some insight into their strategy. Now, as I usually do, I'm going to turn the clock back a bit and zoom out to give context and better explain my thoughts. Over the past few years, we've seen an industry push for porting games over to PC. Sega have been religiously putting their back catalog on Steam, Microsoft puts out all their games day and date on PC and rolled out the Halo MCC, and Sony second-party stuff like Death Stranding, Journey, and Quantic Dream games have slowly trickled over as well. Why? Well, PC gaming has been growing like a weed. In a market where the average consumer is largely moving away from traditional computers, especially desktop ones, in favor of, let's be honest, cell phones, gaming PCs stubbornly buck that trend and continue to become more and more popular, and I think more importantly, more and more mainstreamed. Look at some of the biggest games of the last 4 years. PUBG, Fortnite, Apex Legends, Warzone, Valorant. These are games that dominate on PC, and even for the ones that are or became multi-plat, if you look at the big streamers that rack up millions of views, the majority of them are playing on PC, which has no doubt been instrumental in the proliferation of PC players. And I can tell you that I've anecdotally seen it for myself. I started going to Micro Center in 2015, and the place was like a graveyard. It felt like it could go bankrupt the next day. Now I go there and there's long lines and customers with carts full of expensive products. As a result of this rapid growth, the PC space has become a battleground for publishers and developers desperate to get the attention and coin of this fresh new audience. That's why we saw everyone and their mother put out their own launcher, and it's why we continue to see PC ports of games that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. But it wasn't until last year that we saw Sony port over their first-party PlayStation stuff in a big way with Horizon Zero Dawn. Since it was announced, I've had this theory that Horizon's PC release was intrinsically tied to Death Stranding. While Kojima Productions is an independent studio, they did sign a deal with Sony for console exclusivity on Death Stranding, with Sony presumably footing the majority of the bill for development in exchange. The key term here being console exclusivity. Death Stranding was always going to come over to PC, it was baked into that deal from day one. For those who are unaware, Kojima Productions shares Guerrilla Games' Decima engine, and the two actively collaborated on that tech during Death Stranding's development. I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that there was crosstalk between the two regarding Death Stranding's conversion over to PC. It was likely taken into consideration during development long before the PS4 release. I think that because of that, Sony looked at this situation and saw it as an opportunity. Death Stranding is already going to PC, a lot of the heavy lifting in regards to porting the engine has already been done by Kojima, let's throw Horizon on there and see how it does, why not? That was back in August of last year, and it was finally followed up very recently with Days Gone, a perfect candidate for a PC release given its use of Unreal Engine 4. So then why am I surprised by Uncharted 4? Well, I never expected to see one of Sony's holy grail franchises make its way onto PC, let alone be the third game to do so. With the exception of Horizon, I thought they'd stay away from the super performers, the Uncharteds, the God of Wars, and go with more stuff in the vein of Days Gone, something like Until Dawn or Infamous Second Son. I don't mean this in a rude way, but kind of second-tier exclusives. It can't be overstated enough that Naughty Dog is Sony's crown jewel, and if they're going to put one of their games on PC, that signals to me two things. First off, no game is off the table for a PC release, and secondly, this strategy of putting old exclusives on PC is something they're looking to stick with. Why the enthusiasm? Money, and well, it's easy. Game development is long, expensive, and can be problematic. Putting your old game on PC is relatively quick, cheap, and straightforward. This is why we saw so many remasters last gen. Take a look at the slide. 250% return on investment for Horizon. Remember, Horizon suffered from pretty severe technical issues at launch. It was already a 3-year-old game at that point, and while the sales numbers reported seemed decent, around 700,000 in the first month, that's table scraps compared to the millions sold on PS4, and I personally didn't observe this game as selling particularly well. Despite all that, which is basically the worst circumstances possible, it was still a financial success for them, because it's so cheap and easy to port these games that are already running on the x86 architecture that even light sales numbers are worth the effort. The most crucial sales period for games is the first few weeks. That's why publishers don't really care that DRM eventually gets cracked. It's just there to protect that initial sales period. These games that are 2, 3, in Uncharted's case, 5 years old, have made their money back and done what Sony initially wanted them to do. For lack of a better term, it's a fully depreciated asset. They've already sold 90% of the copies they're ever going to sell to PlayStation owners. So it makes perfect sense to bring these games that have already served their purpose for the PlayStation platform over to a fresh new audience and make a little bit of money, instead of letting them rot for eternity. And of course, as mentioned in the slide, this also brings new players into the world of PlayStation. They'll play and enjoy Horizon on PC, but ultimately, if they want to play the sequel, they'll need a PlayStation, at least at first. They listed China, Russia, and India as potential growth regions, which is exactly what I would have imagined. These are markets where PC dominates, and we've seen all kinds of weird stuff like Call of Duty Online and Halo Online trying to penetrate these markets to varying levels of success, so anything Sony can do there with their games is a win. I think this is a very sensible approach for Sony to take on PC. Microsoft's Play Anywhere initiative is great for players like me who prefer PC, but I feel like it's destroying the value of their console. Now, I understand that their push is for Games Pass, but I just don't understand how the economics work out for them. Take me, for example. I want to play everything, and I'll buy whatever hardware I need to make that happen. I haven't turned on an Xbox since 2015, and outside of the backwards compatibility, their new hardware is absolutely useless to me, which means that I'm not buying their controllers and accessories or digital games or Xbox Live. I know that Windows is Microsoft, but that just can't be good for Xbox. The Sony strategy allows them to give their console true exclusivity for a long period of time, give their big games a second wind of media coverage and sales to a brand new market, and then in turn, hopefully create some new PlayStation converts. People like me who value playing games at launch will continue to buy and use Sony hardware, and in some extreme cases, will actually double dip when the PC version drops. It's a much more conventional model than what Microsoft is doing, and I have to imagine that it's more profitable as well. I do not expect to ever see Sony first-party games launch day and date on PC, and setting aside the bizarre situation with MLB The Show, I would also never imagine a PlayStation game on Xbox or vice versa. Both Sony and Microsoft seem to view PC as Switzerland, this sort of neutral space that doesn't directly compete with their consoles. But now that we're seeing Sony's strategy solidify so quickly and aggressively, I think what we can expect to see is that once they've brought over enough of the back catalog, new stuff will start to come to PC at a more predictable and consistent cadence, say 12 to 16 months after release on PlayStation. I feel like anything less than a year would jeopardize the value of the PlayStation platform. I differ from a lot of PC players in that I don't hate first-party console exclusives. In fact, they're usually the games I get most excited for, and I think they hold a pivotal position in the industry as these expensive tentpole showcases for the consoles. What I don't like is for these monumental accomplishments to be forever trapped on dated hardware with low resolutions and 30 FPS caps. Look at Metal Gear 4. While not a first-party game, it's doomed to the PS3 dungeon, where it does not run well at all, and with it being under the house of Konami, that's unlikely to ever change. It's a cruel and unjust fate for a game that deserves so much better, and unfortunately, it's a fate that many other great games share. While you'll see a vocal minority of fanboys that decry Sony's support of PC as some kind of personal insult to them, I don't see how this can be anything other than good news. It means these games are no longer held hostage by hardware and can live on forever, and even if you never touch the PC version, it means more money for Sony and more fans of these franchises, which can only serve to strengthen PlayStation. What I would be mad about as a PlayStation-only person is that both Death Stranding and Horizon have still not received PS5 updates. I think if a PS4 game is going to PC, it should be updated for PS5 because that does seem a bit rude. In conclusion, preservation of games is always good, but I'm just ecstatic about this from an enthusiast perspective. Sony's first-party developers have been doing a fantastic job giving their PS4 games PS5 patches. And that's great. It's half the reason I even wanted a PS5, but they're somewhat limited. We get that 60 FPS bump, but we're not seeing things like native 4K. This is likely a limitation of the games still running in a form of backwards compatibility instead of being native PS5 games. So those patches are great, but PC ports are even better. They can go forward forever and are naturally improved over time with new hardware, without the need for further patches. For me, it's just about seeing these games in the best light possible. Higher resolution, higher frame rate, just a more scalable and luxurious experience. I'm foaming at the mouth in anticipation of what a Naughty Dog game will look like running on my PC. It might not be a huge deal for others, but it is for me. A lot of these first-party PS4 games are still astoundingly good-looking, and with unlocked frame rates, unlocked resolution, and maybe some sliders to push other things past what was possible on PS4, I'd revisit all of them and enjoy them as if they were new again. Of course, the game we all want to see is Bloodborne. There's no way that Sony isn't aware of the demand for literally anything to be done with it, and hopefully the absence of any enhancements thus far indicates that something deeper is in the works. Regardless, the door is now more open for that, and both PC and PlayStation fans should be excited about it. I used to love making these kinds of videos, so it's nice to get back to them, and hopefully you guys enjoy them too. Twitter, it's in the description. Likes and subscriptions, they're greatly appreciated. Outside of Bloodborne, let me know what PlayStation exclusives you'd like to see come over to PC, and until next time, thanks for watching.